Hello and good evening to you. There is little comfort tonight for mortgage holders and other borrowers from today's developments on the currency markets. The speculative attack on the European exchange rate mechanism, which forced the devaluation of the Irish pound, continued today. Under pressure was the Danish Kroner, which investors believe is next in line for devaluation. Elsewhere in the markets, confusion over British economic policy caused a further fall in the value of sterling. As a result, wholesale interest rates here increased. The building societies had said wholesale rates would have to fall if an increase in mortgage rates was to be avoided. There were also reports today of some outflows of money from this country.
The European exchange rate mechanism is in turmoil again. This time it's the Danish crown which is taking a hammering. The markets believe that all the currencies within the ERM are going to be devalued one after another. The Central Bank of Denmark increased interest rates this morning by 1.5% to protect the currency, but it did little to deter the speculators. The crown was at its lowest permitted limit in the ERM, and the central banks of Ireland, Holland and Germany had to intervene in the market to support it. Because of the tensions in the ERM, the German mark has strengthened in value. The Irish pound is no longer at the top of the ERM band. This has helped our position against sterling, as the British currency fell again, despite denials of newspaper reports of another cut in British interest rates and of a rift between the Prime Minister and his Chancellor. The Irish pound is now trading at about £1.02 sterling. The threat of a mortgage rate increase loomed larger today as the key one-month rate on the Dublin wholesale money market went up from 16% to 17.25%. The building societies say they're monitoring the situation, but it's unlikely they'll take any decision on a rate increase until early next week.
The Cabinet has reached agreement on the level of government spending this year. The book of estimates, setting out the details of expenditure by all government departments, will be published at the end of next week. The Coalition's first budget is expected this day 3 weeks. Before today's Cabinet meeting, the Minister for Enterprise and Employment, Ruairi Quinn, said the extra cost of devaluation would have to be carried by those best able to bear it. He said the weekend devaluation of the pound had worked so far.
The ministers going into today's Cabinet meeting, the first since devaluation, must have been acutely aware that the weekend action has made the budgetary situation even more difficult. It's estimated that the devaluation of the Punt will cost the country around 80 to 100 million pounds alone this year. This extra burden comes on top of an already difficult financial situation. Going into the Cabinet meeting, the Minister for Enterprise and Employment, Ruairi Quinn, said he believed the weekend devaluation had worked so far. But what about the continuing pressure on interest rates?
Well, it's impossible to predict what way the market is likely to move. As far as we're concerned, we've taken every reasonable course of action that any prudent government could do to minimise that risk.
But Minister, some of your own Labour backbenchers are saying, listen, Labour, the poorer sections of the community can't carry the burden. It must be those who can afford to pay it.
What we have consistently said, and there is no problem within the government in relation to this matter, is that yes, 1993 is going to be a difficult year. The burden is going to be shared by everybody, and it will be carried by those best equipped to bear it.
We're facing very considerable difficulties, but we expect to come through with a budget which takes account of all of the features that are there at the present time, and also to make sure that people who have difficulties don't suffer as a result of any measures that have to be taken.
But do you think the devaluation has made it more difficult for you?
Of course it has.
Meanwhile, Labour backbenchers going into their parliamentary party meeting this afternoon were also expressing concern about the new budgetary situation.
We are impressing upon our ministers, and we'll continue to do, that whoever is to take the cuts hasn't got the people who can least afford it. And we will insist on that line right up until the end.
You know, we do have a golden circle in the country, and these are the people that will have to pay up as far as we're concerned in the Labour Party.
Well, tonight's announcement that the Cabinet has reached agreement on departmental spending estimates for this year brings to an end a process which began when Fianna Fáil and Labour entered their talks on coalition. They spent difficult days deciding where the spending axe should fall, and even when they agreed a programme for government, the budget issue had not been fully resolved. In the following days, ministers sought to bridge a gap of something over £200 million, but their room for manoeuvre was tightly limited by their commitment to guidelines in the Maastricht Treaty, setting a budget deficit of around 3% of GDP. Then came devaluation, and with it further costs, pushing the gap closer to £350 million. A tough budget was about to become even tougher. With the government strapped for cash, the first casualty will almost certainly be the process of lowering income tax rates, a feature of recent budgets. Ministers have been stressing there's little scope for any easing of the tax burden this year. Indeed, even a pledge to remove low-paid families from the tax net may have to be scaled back. However, the coalition has pledged to maintain tax reliefs on mortgage and VHI payments. But with interest rates remaining high and threatening to climb higher, it may have to go further to help hard-pressed home owners. It can also be expected to honour its commitment to increase social welfare benefits in line with inflation, although after devaluation that too will cost even more. So the coalition has to find more money for public pay increases, for social welfare and for the higher interest on the national debt, among other things, within tight budgetary constraints. And that means it's going to have to prune public spending significantly and implement a sharp increase in indirect taxation. The old reliables like drink and tobacco are likely to be hit the hardest.
Donald Kelly at Leinster House. Well, still on the currency crisis, Ireland's European Commissioner Pádraig Flynn has said there's an urgent need to address the problems of the European exchange rate mechanism. At a meeting of the Commission today, he referred to the devaluation of the pound and said there was something inherently wrong with the system when one country was exposed to the full force of those who wanted to wreck it, while others watched on.
The Commission spent over 2 hours at its weekly meeting discussing the currency turmoil of recent weeks. Pádraig Flynn used the occasion to make some very blunt observations on the operation of the exchange rate mechanism.
It pointed out to the Commission today that the political will and the commitment of Member States had to be there to support currencies that were under attack from predators or from manipulators of the markets. And I also stressed the point that if there were weaknesses in the ERM system that could be corrected, then they should be corrected as a matter of urgency. Otherwise, the whole credibility of the system would collapse.
He said afterwards anyone who shares the vision of Maastricht must feel a sense of disappointment over the way the Irish pound was left to fend for itself against the full force of speculators. The Social Affairs Commissioner said economic and monetary union with the key goal of a single currency enjoys overwhelming support among the citizens of Europe. But he stressed the need to refine the workings of the ERM so that confidence in the system can be restored. Mr. Flynn said it's unacceptable to contemplate that a crude form of Darwinism, the survival of the fittest, could take over the EC when it's threatened by recession.
Today's Commission discussion will create further pressure for the completion of the report on the exchange rate mechanism by European central bankers. It could be ready on time for the meeting of EC finance ministers, including Bertie Ahern, here in Brussels later this month. There was some more gloomy news tonight. The Commission's latest report on the European economy suggests it could be 1994 before there's any significant improvement in community-wide unemployment.